repeat the words of Lord Sri Krishna and our founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada and the great Acharyas. So, anyone here for the very first time? I think you were here last week, right? You were here in the past, no? Yeah.
Yeah, I was here about 6 months ago.
Yeah. How are you doing? Tell me your name again. Carlos, yeah. What brought you back? You.
I like the whole culture of Krishna.
Nice.
I've been enjoying service and stuff since 2003 when I first got introduced to it in college.
And you came with a friend.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Brianni.
Brianni?
Yeah.
Okay.
Same name as the dish.
Really? Was that purposeful?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I don't think they're making biryani today, but some variation on that. But it'll be good. That's prasadam. Thank you, Carlos and Biryani. Thank you all. So I was going to speak on a topic. My slides are very simple, and you can follow along. I've written everything I'm going to say. Most of it is plagiarized from the Acharyas and wonderful senior devotees, so you can follow along. Vancha kalpa tribhyascha kripo sindhabhye vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavyo namo namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamita Namne Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Rishesha Shanyavadi Pashtatai Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Ganda Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Agyantimirandasya Jananjala Shalakaya Chakshurunmitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So we're going to talk about something called life. Something that we all have an experience with. About a particular aspect of life. Does anybody here find that day-to-day life has its ups and downs? Does everybody have simply ups all the time? No. He does. So, what do you think are things that help us deal with the... Everybody has a good time when everything's going according to our desire, but through difficulties, what do we think helps us? What gives us strength?
Why is this happening to me?
Why is this happening to me? Yes, that's a very common question. Love? Love for? Love for self. Yes. Yes, you're honest. Yeah. A lot of devotees will say love for Krishna, but oftentimes it's love for our own self also. Other things? You want to add anything? Tulsi? The bigger picture. You're a college student, you just finished third year, right? So what helps in the ups and downs of day-to-day life? Friends, yes. Yes. My daughter once said a funny thing to me. She said, "You don't have a friend." I said, "I do." She said, No, you don't." I said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "Name me one." I was about to. She said, "No, it has to be one who's not a devotee." So I realized that, we're somewhat selective in who we're intimate with. But yes, anything else?
Love for loved ones.
Yeah, Prabhu said that. Love for loved ones. Yes. Okay. I think, so this is a beautiful painting of can anybody tell who's in the middle? Yes. And in front of him, sitting right and directly in front of him, Parikshit Maharaj. So this is about the past, in a way, the pastime of Parikshit Maharaj. So the one seated on the seat is Shukadev Goswami. He's a spiritual teacher. He's the son of Vyasadeva, a very empowered, saintly personality. And the one sitting directly in front of him is Parikshit Maharaj, the the grandson of the Pandavas. So this is the only painting I have on this. Sorry, Ashish Prabhu, I know you're very artistic, and Mansi Ganga Mataji, but this is the only painting I have, so I'll just speak a little bit. Has anybody here not heard of Parikshit Maharaj? If you haven't, can you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. So has anybody heard of Yudhishthira Maharaj, Arjun? Yes? You've heard of Arjun, right? The great warrior in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So his family was called the Pandavas, with 5 of them. And they had, I won't go through the process, but they eventually had a grandson by the name of Parikshit Maharaj. And so Parikshit Maharaj was saved by Lord Krishna when he was in the womb of his mother. And because one of the opponents in the battle in Kurukshetra tried to, out of vengeance, kill him while he was inside the womb of his mother. And Lord Krishna came, and actually he saw Lord Krishna in person while he was in the womb inside his mother. How special is that? And Lord Krishna protected him against the weapon that was discharged by the vengeful person, whose name is Ashwatthama. So in the old days, nuclear weapons were called Brahmastra. They were discharged by the use of powerful sound vibrations, not by pressing a button. And they were very selective in who they would attack. And once they were released, nothing could stop that process. So Srila Prabhupada talks about how the warfare was very selective in that a weapon could be discharged and specifically pinpointed just by the use of sound. And so, but not everybody who was very powerful could retract that weapon back. And so the weapon was discharged, and it was like a nuclear bomb going towards the womb of Parikshit Maharaj's mother while he was in there. And Krishna came and protected him. Now, subsequently, when the Pandavas, who won the battle of Kurukshetra, became the rulers of Hastinapur and basically the world, eventually the idea was it is important in a kingly family to have heirs, so the next prince can take over. So their grandson was called Parikshit Maharaj. And so Parikshit Maharaj was a very elevated soul. We're reading about him these days in our Srimad Bhagavatam Sunday morning class. And he was very empowered by Lord himself, because the Lord himself protected him while he was in the womb, personally. But one time he went into a forest, as he was a Kshatriya, a warrior, but also a king. And it was common practice for them to develop their skills in terms of endurance, physical ability, tolerating difficulties. A warrior has to do that. And even though he was a king, he still had those qualities within him. And so he went to the forest, and after a long day in the forest, he became tired and hungry and thirsty. So he went to the cottage of a saintly personality. I'm not speaking a lot of names, just to kind of focus on the main points. And he went there as a guest, uninvited guest, but a guest. And usually when a guest comes to somebody's home, one usually greets them and gives them a place of rest and gives them some nourishment and some relief from their journey. But that didn't happen because the saintly personality, the sadhu, was absorbed in remembrance of God. And he was in a deep state of samadhi. Remembrance was so strong that he became unaware of material activities going on around him. The king seemingly forgot that, and out of a feeling of disrespect, he picked up a dead snake and he put it around the saintly personality's neck. And the saintly personality was so absorbed, he was not disturbed. Because to be absorbed in spirit means to be detached from matter. And as a result, the king just went on his way. Subsequently, the son of the saintly personality heard, because he was at a distance, about this activity that had gone on, this apparent insult to his father. And so since the son had some of the potencies, we're just talking about Parikshit Maharaj. So since son had some of the potencies of the father, the son, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Prabhu, Hare Krishna. So since the son had some of the potencies of the father, the son became angry. He had potency, but he didn't have qualification necessarily. He became angry that how dare this person who is a king put a snake around my father's neck. And he said, I curse this individual to die within 7 days as a result of a bite of a venomous bird. And so his father immediately understood what his son had done and was very disappointed. So he sent somebody over to find Parikshit Maharaj. Found somebody to tell him, hey, this curse has been put onto you. And of 1 week. Please bear this in mind and take appropriate action. And so Parikshit Maharaj did not do that. And the consequence of ultimately of that was that he elected to accept what fate had brought to him, death. And he accepted it in the means of saying, okay, now I know the purpose of my life. I want to find out what is the purpose of life in general and of one who's about to die. And so this meeting here, depicted on this painting, is of him meeting a great saintly personality, Shukadev Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, and receiving instruction on what is the goal of life, and specifically for what should one who's specifically about to die contemplate. There was a funny story was one time a report in the 1970s, India was not doing necessarily super well in terms of material abundance, like food, grains, and things like that. And there was a fair amount of people, infants, etc., dying because they didn't have enough food. And so a reporter said to Srila Prabhupada, he was talking to Srila Prabhupada and he was saying, what do you think about the mortality rate in India? Meaning the death rate in India. And Srila Prabhupada said, death rate everywhere in the world is the same. Like, what's the death rate in the US? 100%. What's the death rate in Russia? 100%. So then the reporter realized, wait a minute, yeah, this is true. That, mortality is for everybody, not just Indian kids who are not getting enough food material, etc. So, but Parikshit Maharaj specifically asked, Hare Krishna, welcome. He specifically asked, what is one who's about to die? What should he do? Hare Krishna, remember? So that's a conversation that's occurring, and that's why I'm calling the topic Navigating Life. So that's just background. And some of you who are in our Bhagavatam group have heard portions of this, but I've added other items. So rather than go back and forth between the internet and slide, I'll just focus on the internet for the moment. I'll just focus on the slide. So this is a verse from SB, stands for Srimad Bhagavatam, or also called the Bhagavad Purana. And this is chapter 1, canto 1, chapter 18, verse 28. And what? Can you turn it on down just a bit, please? This is called Will of the Lord. So I'll recite it. Alabda trine bhumi adir asampraktaya santra avagnatam ivataman manamanas aha. The king, not received by any formal welcome, meaning by the saintly personality, by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking he became angry. Okay? So it's describing that pastime of what happened in the hut of the sadhu. Here's Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'll read it. The law of reception in the codes of the Vedic principles states that even if an enemy is received at home, he must be received with all respects. He should not be given a chance to understand that he has come into the house of an enemy. This is called culture. When Lord Krishna, accompanied by Arjuna and Bhim, approached Jarasandha and Magda, the respectable enemies, they were given a royal reception by the king Jarasandha. So Jarasandha was basically a very evil person, but very powerful. So during daytime they fought, but in evening times they were, like guests of each other. Hare Krishna. The guest enemy, namely Bhima, was to fight with Jarasandha, yet they were given a grand reception. At night they used to sit down together as friends and guests, and the day they used to fight, risking life and death. That was the law of reception. The reception law enjoins that a poor man who has nothing to offer his guest should be good enough to offer a straw mat for sitting, a glass of water for drinking, and some sweet words. Therefore, to receive a guest, either friend or foe, there's no expense. It's only a question of good manners. I think we would all agree with that. And the king wasn't an enemy, unlike the situation between Arjuna and or Bhima and Jarasandha. Continuing the purport, I've highlighted something important, or everything is important, but something particularly to pay attention to. When Maharaj Parikshit entered the door of Shamika Rishi, that's the great saintly personality that he offended, he did not accept a royal reception by the Rishi because he knew that saints and rishis are not materially rich men. Prabhu, you can take a mat. But he never expected that a seat of straw, a glass of water, and some sweet words would be denied to him. We're talking about the pastime of Parikshit Maharaj. He was not an ordinary guest, nor was he an enemy of the Rishi, and therefore the cold reception by the Rishi astonished the king greatly. Maybe one could understand in a worldly manner that, hey, if if the person who's trying to kill me comes to my home, maybe I won't receive him so warmly. Even though that was not Vedic culture, as Srila Prabhupada said, between Bhima and Jarasandha, they still at night time, spent time together. But Srila Prabhupada is making a point that this person wasn't even, A, he was a king, so he was not an ordinary person, and B, he was not his enemy of the saint. As a matter of fact, the king was right to get angry with the Rishi when he needed needed a glass of water very badly. Now this is very telling because out of thirst for a glass of water, a snake was draped around the saintly personality's neck. Now, that same person, Maharaj Parikshit, for 7 days didn't drink a drop of water. So when you see something like that, there's some instruction coming. To become angry in such a grave situation, Shri Sachin Dev ki jai, Shri Lakshmi Narasimha Dev Bhagwan ki jai, Shrimati Vrinda Devi ki jai. To become angry in such a grave situation was not unnatural for the king, but because the king himself was not less than a great saint. How many kings do we have on the planet right now that are saintly in qualities? Or presidents or prime ministers or whatever. But in those days, they were representatives of God themselves, and that's why they were empowered, because they had training from birth by great saintly personalities. But because the king himself was not less than a great saint, his becoming angry and taking action were astonishing. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, to one extent, the saint should have, the sadhu, Shimaka Rishi, should have greeted Maharaj Parikshit, the king. But the king, being saintly, should, one of the qualities of sadhu is very tolerant. That he became angry is astonishing. So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also good as the king. But by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king's becoming unattached. So the title of the lecture today is Navigating Life. So that's why I picked this pastime. Ways that to the king becoming unattached to family connection and governmental activities, and thus becoming a completely surrendered soul onto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. We all, like the saying goes, after World War II, what was the saying? There are no atheists in the foxhole. Everybody know what's a foxhole? So in World War I, there was no precision-guided cruise missile or something like that. High-powered artillery had been developed, and it was basically, death, because it was like random shooting across each other. And I think in Russia, 20 million people died in World War I. So what they would do is they would sit in trenches, and one side would get out of the hole in the ground and run towards the other side and try to overtake that hole, while the other enemy's just shooting, and firing guns and machine guns and things like that, and chemical weapons like poisonous bombs. And so the saying that came up there was, when you're in that hole and they're coming at you, there's no atheist there. Everybody believes in God. So, of course, the king is a saintly personality, but it gave him a chance to seemingly surrender to the Lord and to the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. So I think this is very important. The merciful Lord sometimes creates such awkward positions. Srila Prabhupada's use of words are very careful. Such awkward positions for his pure devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence. But outwardly, the situations appear to be frustrating to the devotees. So, outwardly, the situations, when we look at this happening, not only just to the non-devotee, but to the devotee in particular, it appears, how do I understand this? How do I understand this difficulty? So this is the nature of life. We have a plan, and then we have challenges. And so that's why we're calling this navigating life. The devotees of the Lord are always under the protection of the Lord, and in any condition, frustration or success, the Lord is a supreme guide for the devotees. The pure devotees therefore accept all conditions of frustration as blessings from the Lord. Hare Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada is commenting about how Parikshit Maharaj accepted this curse. And because he's saintly, he understood that there was a divine will occurring. It's like when Yudhishthira Maharaj was lamenting that so many millions of people died in the Kurukshetra war. Nobody could comfort him, not even Krishna Bhagwan, not all the great saintly personalities, not even family members, until he went to Bhishma Dev, his grandfather, who he himself personally shot with arrows. And Bhishma Dev said, "It is the will of the Lord, and you cannot know that will. You just have to accept it and be an instrument." And that brought peace to Yudhishthira Maharaj, because it displays the kind of blame game that he had in his heart and realized it's the plan of the Lord. So for us, life has a way of rudely ejecting us from our trajectory at any point, right? At any point. And we see that change is unstoppable, meaning it can't be checked. There are some things that are beyond our control, and they would occur whether we want them to or not. And unpredictable, meaning they can happen at any time, right? Ashish Prabhu was driving in the area of Yellowstone, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden a big animal came in the way and the car got destroyed and people were luckily saved. The animal unfortunately left its body. So how do we navigate the course of life, especially when it's riddled with surprises that are beyond our control? Right? We all think about that. Do you guys ever get frustrated with things that happen? You do? Really? You live in a beautiful farm and an idyllic life. How can you get frustrated? When you get a cold, it's frustrating, right? Yeah. No matter what age, young or old, rich or poor, healthy or unhealthy, everybody has frustrations. So the question is how to deal with them. So these are some instructions. So first, one can deliberate. So I'm going to have a couple of slides on this. So first principle is adjust our expectation. Maharaj Parikshit, being a king and representative of God, understood the ways of the world. So he wasn't shocked that there was a reversal in his life. Because we know from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna Bhagavan anger leads to illusion. Illusion leads to bewildered memory, loss of intelligence, and repeat cycle of birth and death, right? It's a famous section of chapter 2. So an expectation will bring great frustration because if it's unmet. Because part of the idea of being in the material world is to get instruction from the college of the material world. That we're not designed to control the world, so because of that, we shouldn't be surprised that things don't go according to our plan. You know, people say, if something can go wrong, expect it to be, right? That's usually the case. Everybody has had that. So when you think about this, like no expectations, expect things to go wrong, that sounds kind of like a disempowerment and like not a motivating factor. But the good news is that, you know, the whole idea is that we have been together with the material world as an Atma, a spirit soul, for so long. In Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita it says Anadi. What does Anadi mean? Adi, beginning. Anadi, without beginning. Or Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says, without cause. Without cause. Not just time immemorial. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada uses that word. But Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur adds that without origin. So we've been together with Prakriti for our entire material world for our entire life. And the acharyas, when they explain that verse, 13.19 from Bhagavad Gita, talking about the association between Purusha and Prakriti, between the living being and material world, is that material nature is unconscious and a living being is a conscious being. So living being controls material nature, not vice versa. And so the living being, so material nature gives the living being a body that will be consistent with the nature of that living being based on its past karma and guna. And so as a consequence, the living being is meant to oversee the body that has been awarded to the living being because of the living being's past activities, past desires. But Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, Hare Krishna, and other acharyas explain that the unique situation is that which the living being was thinking he or she was going to control, the body that has been awarded to the living being, in fact winds up being the item that controls the living being. Isn't that interesting? We get awarded a body based on our desires, so we can rule over that body, but essentially that body winds up ruling over us and making us think we're the body. So, unexpected reversals in life or navigating life, when those happen, we should understand that happiness is actually within us, not outside us. It's not in outside circumstances. Contentment in life is not based on controlling the external world, but rather controlling our inner expectations and our understanding of who we are. So the idea is not to seek out, the perfect situation, but have perfect consciousness. And that's what Parikshit Maharaj is teaching. So that's the first thing. Adjust our expectation when we have circumstances coming at us in life. Item 2, deliberate on aspiring for connection. So Parikshit Maharaj used that opportunity of the curse to hand over his kingdom to his son and saying goodbye to his family and renouncing his position as the ruler of the world. And he went to the bank of the Ganges with a vow to fast until death. That same person who could not withstand a glass of water being given to him after a journey in the forest sat for 7 days without a drop of water. How did that happen? With an intent, not just a random vow. So in this situation of desperation and surrender, he intensified his spiritual immersion. That's what attracted Shukadev Goswami to him. Shukadev Goswami, he says, because you're a sincere and serious student, you're the most fit to receive this knowledge. So the idea here, we've said it before, is that one needs an anchor in life. That's how you navigate. A boat navigates by having an anchor that it can drop when it's at its destination. So we need that. So for us, that occurs through the processes of bhakti yoga, the activities of Krishna consciousness. So, because bhakti is eternal, it's the Sarup Shakti of Bhagwan. That's why Bhagwan himself is attracted to a bhakta. So when we understand that we have an inner connection with something that's eternal, then no problem. Just like a child may get into trouble doing something, but it the child knows that the parents are there to. I'm looking at your son, Jaisacinandana, your son. He knows that there's somebody to take care of him if he gets into trouble, right? So the idea is that whatever may happen externally, our internal connection doesn't change. And that process of connecting is called yoga, specifically bhakti yoga. So item 1 was adjust our expectation. Item 2 was aspire for connection. And item 3 is, where did I do? Yes. I'll have it later. So, what was Maharaj Parikshit's example? Maharaj Parikshit's example is stated here in Bhagavatam. Utsarjaya sarvata sangam vignajita samishtada vyashakir jaho chisho gangayam swam kalevaram. Furthermore, after leaving all his associates, the king surrendered himself as a disciple to the son of Vyas, Dev. And thus he was able to understand the actual position of the personality of Godhead, and at last he gave up his material body on the bank of the Ganges. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Knowing the transcendental position of the Lord and the transcendental method by which one can approach that transcendental dham, the king was confident about his ultimate destination. And by knowing this, he could leave aside everything material, even his own body, without any difficulty of attachment. In the Bhagavad Gita, it said, Param Dashtva Nivartate. One can give up all connection with material attachment when one is able to see the Param, or the superior quality of things. From Bhagavad Gita, we understand the quality of the Lord's energy that is superior to the material quality of energy. And by the grace of a bona fide spiritual master like Shukdev Goswami, it is quite possible to know everything of the superior energy of the Lord. By the grace of Lord Sri Krishna, Maharaj Parikshit was able to receive the mercy of such a personality as Shukdev Goswami, and thus he was able to know the actual position of the unconquerable Lord. It is very difficult to find the Lord from Vedic literatures, but it's very easy to know him by the mercy of a liberated devotee like Shukdev Goswami. So what seemed like a reversal and discouragement was the opposite. For Arjuna, what seemed like a reversal with having to face his family and teachers in Kurukshetra allowed the Gita to enter into the world, which for Valmiki seemed like a discouragement, allowed the opportunity for Ramayana to be spoken. What for Vyas Dev seemed like a source of alienation after he created all the Vedas and the scriptures, yet a feeling of discontent occurred, allowed Bhagavatam to enter. So tolerance is a very key principle in navigating the difficulties of life. So important that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu listed it in his Shikshastakam. Would somebody like to chant this verse? Tatte anukampam susamishkamano Bhunja evatma kritam vipakam Hridag vagupur vidan namaste Jivetayo yo mukti pada se daya bhag. Thank you, Prabhu. Would you like to read the translation? Can you see it?
My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds. and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim.
Very famous verse. Does anybody know who sang this verse? And when did Brahmaji sing the verse? You can say it loudly, don't be shy. So, has everybody heard of Brahma Vimon Leela? Yes, a couple. Do you want to quickly summarize? So, Brahmaji is, if you look at the family chart for Srimad Bhagavatam, it starts with Brahmaji. It's a very elevated personality. Elevated personalities can sometimes have distress. So sometimes disciplined but not disowned. And it's like that. So Brahmaji did something, kind of trying to play a trick on Lord Krishna. Lord Krishna was out with his friends, the cowherd boys, gopas, and the cows, and he decided to hide, the associates of Lord Krishna, in a cave. And how long did that last, Madhavir Prabhu?
Just a moment of his time, but a year in a...
Yes. So there's a difference between celestial and material world in time scale. Time is the energy of Krishna. We cannot see time, but we can see the effect of time. Kala Shakti. So Krishna knew this intent, and Krishna overcame that intent by manifesting himself as all the cow herd boys and all the calves. And after a year, it became evident that Krishna knew this and was continuing this so-called charade. I won't go into the Leela itself, it's very wonderful. But Brahmaji eventually understands who he's dealing with. That is none other than Swayam Bhagwan, Krishna, even though he may be in the form of a cowherd boy. And Brahmaji feels regret, and Krishna, being the loving father, accepts. And this is a prayer that Brahmaji says. My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. So since Srila Prabhupada did not write the commentary for this particular chapter, does anybody know what was the last verse that Srila Prabhupada translated? Anyone? Yeah. Yes, it's the very last verse, 10:13:64, where Brahmaji is, tears in his eyes approaching Krishna. So you're correct. That was in Vrindavan. So commentary is written by Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur and Sardarsani. And his commentary is very wonderful. He says, and very instructive, a devotee understands that the happiness and distress he undergoes, he should be not capitalized, that he, a devotee, undergoes due to performing bhakti and committing aparadhs. Aparadh means offenses, are the special mercy from the Lord. So the essential takeaway message is, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, if you get nothing else, is that tolerance, he essentially says that tolerance is the process of bhakti. It is like the father who sometimes makes his child drink milk and sometimes makes him drink bitter neem juice. Have you guys had neem juice yet? Are you looking forward to some?
I have.
Did you like it?
Yes. I do quantity also.
But you also drink wheatgrass. So it's a little tough, right?
Yes.
You have to have some tolerance. Sometimes the father embraces and kisses his son, and at other time he beats them. Maybe not so much in the US, but you know, in that culture, yes. The devotee accepts whatever happens to him as the arrangement of the Lord acting for his benefit. Continuing on. The devotee thinks, something that's really lovely about Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, he does this where Lord thinks this, devotee says this, like he's, the heart of the Lord is within the heart of Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur. The Lord certainly knows what is best for me, even if I don't know. Karma and time have no effect on a devotee, so this is Krishna's personal arrangement for me. Out of his mercy, Krishna sometimes gives me happiness and sometimes gives me distress, considering how to engage me in service. So that's very instructive. Right? Considering how to engage me in service. As a father not waiting for the son's demand does everything for the benefit of the son, please bestow upon me whatever you think best for me. One time, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj was talking about that, that famous verse, Sarva Dharma Pratiyaje, right? And a devotee asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj, why was this not considered by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be like, the end-all, be-all of the essence of bhakti? Does anybody know what Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said? Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said, what does it say for the son if the father has to ask him to love him? What does it say for the son if the father has to ask him, please love me? If I love my father, father doesn't have to ask me to surrender to him and worship him. Commentary continued. The person who spends his life offering respects with body, mind, and words to the lotus feet of Lord Krishna while tolerating the suffering of austerities, notice tolerating the sufferings of austerities or other hardships, becomes the recipient, daya-bhak, of two results. One, liberation from material bondage, which is not the primary goal, we know, for devotees. And two, service of the Lord, mukti-pada. So notice he didn't translate mukti-pada as muksha-pada, but as the service of the Lord. So Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur is here himself explained to us how to navigate life by having this inner consciousness due to our connection with the presence of God. As the inheritance from the Father maintains the life of the Son, so that's where the inheritance part comes in. It maintains the life of the Son. So the attainment of liberation and service to the Lord maintains the life of a devotee. And so the devotee living in the world remains fixed on the path of devotion as a result. So some of the things I took away from this purport, as well as Srila Prabhupada's comments about for us. Krishna's gifts, I was reading some things written by Bhujan Prabhu in a lecture in Vrindavan and others. Krishna's gifts can come through suffering as well. And Krishna helps us in our struggles by, in the sense that he's showing the insubstantiality of the material through distresses that occur. Vishnujan Swami, one of Srila Prabhupada's very powerful disciples, wrote an article in BTG in the 1970s saying sometimes even a tiny soul can endeavor to get out of the material world. So he said sometimes when you come into connection with devotees, there's a lot of negativity, like this material world is a place of death, suffering, illness, disease, old age. It's not a place for a gentleman, etc. And he said sometimes you get kind of disturbed by hearing that because it sounds like a lot of negativity, but he said there's a purpose behind this instruction, which is to teach us not to get so comfortable in this world. Right? Because he said, if you get comfortable in this world, then you may not have enough incentive to, say, I want to come out of this situation. So Krishna's gifts can come by showing us that the material world has challenges. Because if everything in the world was perfect, we would have such a strong desire to enjoy, we may never come to spiritual life. Krishna Bhagavan himself talks about the 4 types of people that come to him, and one of them is the distressed. But it is sorry for the typo, it is the suffering that pushes us through more suffering that we learn our greatest lessons, right? Even in education, right? Like if you're learning math or sciences or writing a paper and the teacher gives you a F or a C, I know you guys never get that, right? But that pushes you on to be like more determined, I need to understand this really well, let me absorb myself. And so suffering has a purpose as well, because through suffering we become strong. Athletes know that. Anybody watch an athlete run a marathon? They don't look like they're engaged in a party. At the end, they're ready to fall. Why are they doing it? Because they know that's the process of resistance training. So just like it works with weights and push-ups and running and swimming, it works also in spiritual life. Because it makes us remember Krishna's teachings, and it decreases the desire to enjoy. So it is Krishna's instructions. At least that's the point of view that a devotee will have. And if one is very lucky, then one views suffering as a connection with Krishna. Thinking that whatever is happening is like appearance and disappearance of summer and winter, right? We know that verse from Gita. Matra sparshastu kuntayas. All the difficulties that are happening, so therefore our devotee's life is all the difficulties that are happening are Krishna's desire. And so I should reflect on the situation and act with a devotional understanding. Not just trying to correct the situation, but what's the lesson from this situation? Because if we try to correct situations, we're inevitably going to use our material intelligence. And that's not the nature of the Atma. And our material intelligence can be faulty at any time. And oftentimes, it's like quicksand. You're trying to make the best of a bad situation materially, and it just gets worse sometimes. And we have to understand that, if it's a personal thing that we feel from somebody else, this is particularly for devotees, then we should understand that it's affecting not the Atma, because Krishna himself says the Atma cannot be affected by anything material, right? So it's affecting what? My sense of who I am, my false ego, not my true ego. But my position as servant of Krishna cannot be taken away, because that's the nature of every living being. It's a spark from the ray of the source, which is Krishna. And if I keep that connection, that nothing can harm me. Only thing that can harm me is my material consciousness. If we remain in that conception, then we make progress. Make progress. Last year when we had Swami Bhagavan Maharaj, we asked him to talk about mediocrity in bhakti. And he said one of the ways to overcome mediocrity is to increase intensity. Intensity of how we read scriptures, how we chant, etc. And the other way, he said, is to increase responsibility. Take on something that's out of your comfort zone. Because there's no such thing as standing still in Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada instructed that. Prabhupada Maharaj specifically told me that Srila Prabhupada in New York said, if you're trying to hover in one spot, you're going to sink. So as devotees, we need to know that. So intensity and responsibility. When we have that, then we come into the position of humility because we realize, hey, my effort, no matter how intense, like Maharaj was saying, he one time at a 64 rounds a day asked Barahari Prabhu, how is your chanting? Everybody knows Barahari Prabhu's chanting is without false ego. And Barahari Prabhu said it was like a desert. It was like a desert. So, humility. And frees one from our conception of our own material position and the sense of controlling things. And so the false ego is dissolved as a result of just having tolerance and connection with Krishna. So, adjust our expectation, accept our situation, and aspire for connection. Expectation, situation, connection. That's how one navigates this life. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much. Vanchakalpatribhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavyo namo namaha. I'm sure I made many mistakes, many errors, many oversights. Would anybody like to add something, a reflection, point of correction? Only you can answer your questions. We have many elevated devotees, sure.
So, in that slide that you showed in the tolerance process of bhakti, there was a statement which was very interesting.
This in Vishnava Chakravarti Thakur's.
Yeah.
Where? Here?
That first bullet point. A devotee understands that the happiness and distress he undergoes due to performing bhakti and committing aparadhas are special mercies from the Lord.
Right.
So how do I understand this? Committing aparadhas is mercy.
I think it's understanding that I have things that are coming into my life from many past times, and the process of committing aparadhas, if I'm a thoughtful devotee, I will be aware of them, right? Like, let's say you go into a home, where I work near the hospital, people have homeless tents. Yesterday, while we were going to something with Vanmali Prabhu, we saw somebody's truck parked next to the park, and it was filled with things that people collect, homeless people collect, like bags of garbage and dustbins and this and that. And that person was totally oblivious to that dirt that was hanging out around him. And so most people in the world are totally oblivious to the offenses that they're creating, right? But through the process of bhakti, through Shastra, Shraddha, right? Sri Rupa Goswami says, how do you get Shraddha? He said, Shraddha comes in the form of Shastra. So from the process of bhakti, one understands that these are things that I need to avoid. And in that way, I'm actually aware that I should avoid it. And when we commit aparadhas, we realize that it's Shishinatai Sachan Dev Ki Jai. We realize that, a correction is occurring. A correction is occurring to me that will actually elevate me, because I have a connection with Krishna, I have a commitment to Krishna through the process of sadhana. I'm not a perfect being. I have anadi, lifetimes of association with the material world and with my false ego, my dear friend. And this aparadh, committing aparadh, will create a consequence, and I will be forced to realize my offense. It's like Vishnava Chakravarti Thakur says, right? Anartha Vritti. He says after that everything else is easier, much easier. Would you like to answer your question?
No, that was my question.
Okay. Yeah, I think a devotee should ideally be not blind, spiritually or materially, meaning aware of the consequences of what we do, right? And if we're aware of our consequence of what we do, then we lament about it. I got angry when I shouldn't have. I got full of pride when I should not have. No, let me try to be aware of this. Let me understand I have a relationship with this devotee. I don't get into Golok Vrindavan with that kind of an attitude. So I think it's a process of self-awareness, is the way I looked at it. Because committing aparadh is usually not a mercy, but becoming aware of the aparadh is actually a source of humility, right? Oh, I did this. What? I'm chanting 16 rounds and I'm doing this. How? I mean, that was an aparadh that Parikshit Maharaj did, right? To the Rishi. But because of that, recognizing it and acting on it and taking greater shelter, gave him the mercy of Bhagavan. That's the way I take it. Just like Brahmaji, right? He committed an aparadh to Lord Krishna himself. But because of that aparadh, he's getting to see the Lord. Is that okay? Okay. And question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This sounds so simple.
Sorry.
This sounds so logical.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful class, Prabhu. But I know that when I feel somehow slighted, that I didn't get the entitlement that I deserved, I'm not advanced. I don't know that I should be reaching for Krishna. So I have to pray.
Yes.
I have to pray to great acharyas. I have to pray to Srila Prabhupada and our whole disciplic succession to help me. And then sometimes I have some success.
Agree? Prayer is powerful. It's a connection from heart to heart. And I think just the act of praying is actually an act of somebody with some element of humility, right? Somebody has no humility, they won't even recognize these things. And won't. It's like being pious, being pious is not our goal, but it certainly helps in the process of bhakti. So I think recognizing that we're not there is, like Bhurjan Prabhu was saying in his lecture, Vrindavan, he said we have to be real. Where are we at? Versus where do we want to go to? And Krishna will act in his own time, of his own will, based on reciprocation with our desire and our sincerity. But Krishna is willing to wait innumerable lifetimes for us, in innumerable universes, for us to, make that step. But I think by recognizing that this is occurring within me, then that helps with the process. If I don't recognize it, then I'm oblivious to it, then I'll just keep doing the same thing again and again. So you use prayer to help yourself? Do you find it gives you strength?
I know from so many failures that I'm not the doer.
Yes.
And I know when there's success, I'm inspired. That inspiration doesn't come from me.
Right.
Therefore, I have to pray.
Yes. One of Srila Prabhupada's disciples in the Prabhupada Memories book says, Srila Prabhupada, the first thing you told us was, we're not the body. And this devotee, I forget what his name was, he said, 30 years later, I'm still struggling to remember that. So, your feeling is not isolated. But I find in those circumstances to really try to understand Trinadapi Sunichana makes a huge difference. To understand that this situation has been by the willing assent of Lord Krishna, so that I can, because when we think about it, the Shikshastakam are designed to destroy our false ego. So something like that can be a great benefit too. Like we learn by our mistakes more than we learn from our successes usually. And as an artist, you probably have practical experience of that. And as a physician, I have practical experience of that too.
I have to pray for every breaststroke.
Yes. Thank you. Anything else you want to add? No.
Who wants to speak?
Okay. I think people want to. Anybody else want to ask something or add something? Okay. So we'll go ahead and stand and chant the Lord's holy name. His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shivancha kalpa tribhyascha, kripo sindhabhye vacha, patita nam pavnebhyo, shambhayo namo namaha. Would you like to chant? Aap chant karo.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine.
Krishna Preshtaya Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine.
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschata Desha Tarine.